The chandeliers of Lady Pemberton's ballroom cast their golden light upon a sea of silk and jewels, illuminating faces flushed with champagne and ambition. Charlotte Hartley stood at the room's furthest edge, a shadow among luminaries, her gloved hands folded with practiced stillness against the pale muslin of her gown. 6 seasons had taught her the art of invisibility, how to position oneself near a potted palm, how to study the marble floor as though its veining held secrets more compelling than the whirl of dancers before her. She had long since stopped hoping for invitations to dance. "There is Miss Hartley." Lady Ashworth's voice carried across the refreshment table with deliberate clarity. The matron's ostrich plumes bobbed as she steered her daughter away with theatrical caution, as though poverty were contagious, as though 26 years without matrimony might somehow taint a girl of 18 summers. "Come, Millicent, we mustn't linger where the air grows stale." Lady Millicent Ashworth, golden-haired, diamond-bedecked, possessed of a fortune that made strong men stammer, cast a glance over her shoulder. Not unkind, precisely, merely indifferent, the way one might look at furnishings too worn for use yet not quite ready for disposal. The girl allowed herself to be guided toward a cluster of officers, their scarlet regimentals bright as fresh wounds against the pastel assembly. Charlotte's fingers tightened against each other. She would not grant them the satisfaction of visible distress. The Hartleys had once commanded respect in these very rooms, before her father's disastrous speculations, before the quiet funeral that society had attended more from duty than affection, before she had become a dependent relation in her uncle's household, tolerated as one tolerates an inconvenient piece of furniture inherited from a deceased relative. The musicians struck up a cotillion. Charlotte turned away from the dancing, her chest constricting with a familiar ache. She knew the location of every doorway in Lady Pemberton's residence, every corridor that might offer temporary escape. With movements calculated not to draw attention, she slipped through the crowd toward the east wing where the library stood in blessed darkness. The heavy oak door closed behind her with a whisper of sound. Charlotte leaned against it, eyes shutting as the muffled gaiety of the ballroom faded to a distant hum. Here, in the darkness perfumed with leather and old paper, she could breathe. She could be Charlotte Hartley, not the rejected girl, not the warning example mothers use to encourage their daughters toward more aggressive matrimonial pursuit. Her eyes adjusted to the dimness. Moonlight filtered through tall windows, silvering the spines of books that lined the walls from floor to ceiling. She moved deeper into the room, trailing her fingers along familiar leather bindings. Lady Pemberton's library had become a refuge these past seasons, a place where no one thought to look for her, where no one cared that she existed. "I was under the impression this room was unoccupied." Charlotte gasped, spinning toward the voice. A man rose from a wing-back chair positioned in shadow near the cold fireplace. Tall, broad-shouldered, his evening clothes cut with an elegance that spoke of Bond Street's finest tailors. She could not discern his features in the darkness, only the outline of him, solid and still as one of the marble statues in Lady Pemberton's garden. "Forgive me," Charlotte managed, gathering her composure with the skill of long practice. "I did not mean to intrude upon your solitude." "Nor I upon yours." His voice held a quality of amusement, cultured and deep. "Though I confess myself curious what drives a young lady from the entertainments of a ball into a darkened library. Unless you share my own distaste for performing the elaborate theater society demands of such occasions." Something in his tone, a weariness that matched her own, loosened the knot of humiliation in her chest. He was a stranger. In the darkness, she was simply a voice, not a cautionary tale. The anonymity felt like a gift. "I find the theater exhausting," she admitted, surprised at her own candor. All those bright smiles and practiced conversations. The desperate hope that one might say precisely the right thing. wear precisely the right expression, and somehow transform into someone worthy of notice. You speak as though you have been found wanting. I speak as one who has learned she does not possess the currency society values. Charlotte moved toward the windows, keeping distance between them. Propriety, even in refuge, must be observed. But you, sir, surely you do not lack for social currency. Your presence here suggests escape from excess rather than exclusion. A soft laugh, surprisingly genuine. Perceptive. Yes, I suppose I am fleeing abundance. There is a peculiar suffocation in being perpetually pursued, in wondering whether any smile directed at oneself is genuine or merely calculated investment in a potentially profitable alliance. How terrible, Charlotte said, unable to suppress a note of irony. To be desired. Is it less terrible to be invisible? The question, asked without mockery, struck something tender in her chest. She turned to face his shadow. I suppose each affliction carries its own burden, though I confess I would trade my invisibility for your visibility, uncomfortable as you find it. Would you? He moved slightly, and moonlight caught the edge of his profile. A strong jaw, dark hair. I wonder. In my experience, those who are perpetually observed become skilled at deception. You, Miss... He waited, but Charlotte did not supply her name. Better to remain nameless, to preserve this strange moment of honesty that felt stolen from the ordinary cruelties of her existence. You, he continued after a moment, strike me as someone who has not yet learned to lie convincingly. Perhaps I have simply had no reason to develop the skill. One must have something worth protecting before one learns to dissemble. You protect your name. Because once you know it, this conversation ends. You will recalibrate your opinion based on my position, my circumstances, my value in the matrimonial market. We will cease to be two refugees from social performance and become instead what society dictates we must be. Silence stretched between them, filled with the distant strains of music. Charlotte felt the recklessness of her words settle over her like the consequences of a foolish wager. She should not have spoken so freely. Should not have revealed the bitterness she worked so diligently to hide beneath resignation. Then let us remain nameless a while longer, he said quietly. Tell me, what book were you seeking when you entered? The question surprised her. Charlotte glanced at the shelves surrounding them. I was not seeking a book. I was seeking silence, respite, a place where I might collect myself before returning to endure what remains of the evening. Then we are kindred spirits indeed. He moved toward the shelves, and Charlotte heard the whisper of leather as he withdrew a volume. Though if you find yourself in need of distraction, I recommend Waverley. Lady Pemberton has a first edition. You are familiar with the contents of her library? I am familiar with most libraries in Mayfair. They are my preferred destination at such gatherings. Charlotte felt herself smile, a genuine expression that felt strange on her features after hours of careful neutrality. Then perhaps we are both inadequately suited to the world that circumstance has placed us in. Or perhaps the world is inadequately suited to those of us who value substance over spectacle. A knock sounded at the door, sharp, intrusive. Your Grace? A servant's voice muffled through oak. Lady Pemberton requests your presence. The supper dance is to begin. Your Grace. The title struck Charlotte like a physical blow. She pressed herself against the window frame as the man, the Duke, moved toward the door. Before opening it, he paused, turning back toward where she stood in shadow. Thank you, he said, for the most honest conversation I have had in longer than I can recall. Then he was gone, and light from the corridor flooded briefly into the library before the door closed once more, returning Charlotte to blessed darkness. She remained frozen at the window, her heart beating with painful force against her ribs. The Duke of Thornfield. She had been speaking with Alexander Pembroke, Duke of Thornfield, the most eligible man in England, the subject of every matchmaking mama's schemes, the gentleman every debutante hoped might glance in her direction. And she, Charlotte Hartley, the rejected girl, had spoken to him with appalling familiarity, had revealed her bitterness, had treated him as though he were simply a man, rather than the pinnacle of matrimonial achievement. Humiliation burned through her, hot and acidic. She pressed her palms against the cool glass of the window, watching her breath fog the pain. Of course he would return to the ball, to Lady Millicent and the countless other beauties who commanded his attention by right of their dowries and connections. He would likely never think of this encounter again, or if he did, it would be with amusement at the peculiar, nameless woman who had waylaid him in a darkened library. Charlotte waited until her breathing steadied, until she could summon the mask of serene resignation she had perfected over 6 long seasons. Then she returned to the ballroom, slipping through the crowd like water through fingers, unremarked and unnoticed. Except she did not know that across the room, standing amid a circle of admirers that included the radiant Lady Millicent Ashworth, the Duke of Thornfield's gaze followed her progress with an expression his sister would later describe as fascinated. 3 days passed before Charlotte dared venture into Hyde Park. She chose the early morning hours deliberately, 7:30, when only servants and tradesmen populated the walking paths, when fashionable society still slumbered in their townhouses. At this hour, she could move through the green spaces unmolested by pitying glances or carefully averted gazes. The morning air carried the sweet dampness of recent rain. Charlotte walked briskly along the Serpentine, her serviceable pelisse buttoned against the spring chill. A few other early risers nodded in passing, a governess with charges, an elderly gentleman exercising his spaniel. No one who would recognize her. No one who mattered. The thunder of hoofbeats made her turn. A magnificent bay stallion approached at a canter, its rider controlling the powerful animal with easy confidence. Charlotte's stomach dropped as she recognized the horseman. The Duke of Thornfield reined in his mount several feet away, dismounting with the fluid grace of a man thoroughly at home in the saddle. "Miss Hartley," he bowed, leading his horse by the reins. What a pleasant surprise. He knew her name. Of course he did. He would have made inquiries after their encounter. Charlotte curtsied, her mind racing through possible responses, all inadequate. "Your Grace, I hope you will forgive my impertinence the other evening. I did not realize that you were speaking to a duke." Amusement colored his voice. "I found your ignorance refreshing. So few people speak to me as though I were merely a man." "You are not merely a man, Your Grace. You are a duke, and I was inappropriately familiar. You were honest. I consider that a virtue rather than an impropriety." He fell into step beside her, the horse following obediently. In daylight, Charlotte could see his features clearly. Strong bones, intelligent gray eyes, a mouth that suggested both humor and determination. He was handsome, undeniably so, though his attractiveness lay less in individual features than in the whole impression of vitality and purpose. "Tell me, do you always walk alone at such unfashionable hours?" "I find these hours most agreeable," Charlotte said carefully. "They allow for contemplation without interruption." An eloquent evasion. "Let me ask more directly. Do you avoid the fashionable hours because society makes you unwelcome during them?" His directness startled her into honesty. "You are remarkably blunt, Your Grace." "Only with those who have proven themselves capable of corresponding candor. Come, you were honest with me in the darkness of Lady Pemberton's library. Can you not extend me the same courtesy in daylight?" Charlotte stopped walking, turning to face him. The horse, a patient beast, lowered its head to crop at the grass. Around them, the park remained blessedly empty of consequence. She made a decision born of recklessness, or perhaps simply exhaustion with pretense. Very well. Yes, I avoid fashionable hours because my presence embarrasses my relations and provides entertainment for those who enjoy observing social failure. I am 26, without dowry or prospects, considered on the shelf by all who bother to consider me at all. Is that candid enough for your grace? Rather than retreat from her vehemence, he nodded thoughtfully. Brutally so, and entirely undeserved, I suspect. Deserve has little to do with circumstance, your grace. Alexander, he corrected. If we are to be honest with one another, titles seem an unnecessary formality. We are not to be anything with one another. Charlotte resumed walking, quickening her pace. This conversation, like our previous one, is an aberration. You will return to your appropriate sphere, and I to mine, and we will not speak again. What if I wish to speak with you again? She stopped once more, incredulous. Why would you wish such a thing? Because you are the first woman in 3 years who has spoken to me as though I possessed a mind worth engaging, rather than merely a title worth capturing. He caught up to her, his expression serious. Because our conversation in the library was the only genuine exchange I have had this entire season. Because I find myself curious about the woman who hides in libraries and walks in parks at dawn to avoid society's judgment. Charlotte's heart hammered against her ribs. This could not be happening. Dukes did not seek out penniless spinsters for conversation. Your Grace, Alexander, I cannot be the object of your curiosity. It is inappropriate. If we are seen speaking, it will cause talk. Let it cause talk. You do not understand. Frustration sharpened her voice. You are untouchable. Whatever speculation might arise from your attentions to someone like me, it will dissipate harmlessly against your rank and consequence, but I will be destroyed by it. They will say I am scheming, calculating, attempting to trap you. I will be mocked more thoroughly than I already am. Then we shall be careful. He gestured to the empty paths surrounding them. We are alone now, are we not? No one to observe or gossip. Might we not meet here, at this hour, and simply converse as two people who find each other's company agreeable? To what end? The question hung between them, unanswerable. Alexander studied her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. Must there be an end? Can we not simply enjoy present moments without calculating future outcomes? Everything in Charlotte's experience screamed warnings. This was dangerous. This was foolish. This would end in humiliation more profound than any she had yet endured. But beneath the warnings, a treacherous hope unfurled in her chest. Small, fragile, impossible to suppress entirely. 1 week, she heard herself say. I walk here each morning at this hour. If you wish to join me, I will not prevent it. But after 1 week, this ends. 1 week, he agreed, his smile swift and brilliant. Then let us not waste the time we have. They walked together for an hour, discussing books and music and the absurdities of social ritual. Alexander possessed a sharp wit that delighted her, and an education that ranged far beyond the typical aristocratic veneer. He asked her opinions and listened to her answers with genuine attention. When they parted, Charlotte returned to her uncle's house in a daze of confused emotion. The pattern repeated over the following days. Each morning, Alexander appeared on his bay stallion, and they walked together through the awakening park. On the 3rd morning, he brought a book he thought she might enjoy. On the 4th, she shared an observation about human nature that made him laugh with surprised pleasure. By the 5th morning, Charlotte had begun to forget the recklessness of their meetings, lost in the simple joy of being seen, being heard, being valued for something beyond her matrimonial marketability. On the 6th morning, he asked about her childhood, and she found herself describing her father, his brilliance, his recklessness, his genuine affection despite the financial ruin he had left behind. When tears pricked her eyes, Alexander had offered his handkerchief without comment or pity, simply patient presence until she collected herself. "Tell me," she said, needing to shift attention from her own vulnerability, "why you retreat from a world that worships you." His expression darkened. "I do not retreat from worship. I retreat from calculation. 3 years ago, I nearly made the gravest mistake of my life. I was younger, more naive, convinced myself enamored of a woman who had perfected the art of appearing perfect. She knew precisely what I wished to see in a potential duchess, and she performed that role flawlessly." What happened? "I overheard her speaking with her mother. They were planning how to secure me, discussing which gestures of affection would be most effective, rehearsing responses to questions I had not yet asked. I realized I had been courting a performance, not a person." He paused, jaw tightening. "Since then, I have been unable to trust any woman who seeks my attention. They are all performing, all calculating their words and gestures for maximum effect." "Not all women," Charlotte said quietly. "No." He turned to look at her directly. "Not you. You speak to me as though my title is an inconvenience rather than an asset. You answer my questions with honesty that sometimes pains you to voice. You are the least calculating woman I have ever encountered. Perhaps because I have nothing to calculate for. One cannot scheme toward an impossible outcome." "Is it impossible?" His voice dropped, taking on an intensity that made her breath catch. "This, what we have been doing these mornings, is it truly impossible?" Charlotte forced herself to meet his gaze. "You are the Duke of Thornfield. I am nobody. When your week is finished, you will return to your world of consequence and propriety, and I will return to mine of invisibility. That is not pessimism, Your Grace. That is reality." Before he could respond, voices echoed from the path ahead, fashionable society, emerging for their morning promenade. The spell of their private world shattered. Charlotte stepped away from him instinctively, creating appropriate distance. "Miss Hartley," he said formally, bowing. "Your Grace," she replied, curtsying before turning away. She did not look back as she walked quickly toward the park gates, but she felt his gaze follow her like warmth against her shoulders. Behind her, she heard the voices of society ladies greeting him with practiced enthusiasm, claiming his attention as was their right. The next morning, the 7th morning, Charlotte arrived at their usual meeting spot to find it empty. She waited for an hour, telling herself she was a fool for hoping, for believing even momentarily that a duke might genuinely seek the company of someone like her. When Alexander did not appear, she walked home with her eyes burning and her throat tight. She did not know that Alexander had been detained by family obligations, that he had sent a note to her uncle's house requesting permission to call upon her formally. She did not know that his mother had heard rumors of his morning walks, and was even now lecturing him about appropriate matches and the dangers of eccentricity. She knew only that the week was over, and he had not come, and the brief, bright interlude of being valued had ended exactly as she had known it must. What Charlotte also did not know was that Lady Beatrice Pembroke, Alexander's widowed sister, had noticed her brother's preoccupation. Beatrice, who had herself endured society's judgment during her own scandalous love match, recognized the signs of genuine attachment. And Beatrice, who possessed both determination and considerable influence over her brother, had decided to intervene. The knock at her uncle's door came 3 days later. Charlotte had retreated into the familiar numbness of resignation, attending no social functions, avoiding even her early morning walks. When the housekeeper summoned her to the drawing room, announcing Lady Beatrice Pembroke, Charlotte's first instinct was to flee. But one did not flee from a lady of rank, regardless of one's own discomfort. Lady Beatrice rose as Charlotte entered, and the warm smile that lit her features was so unexpected that Charlotte stopped short. Where she had anticipated cool assessment or pitying condescension, she found instead genuine friendliness in eyes that were the same gray as Alexander's. "Miss Hartley," Beatrice said, moving forward with both hands extended. "Forgive my presumption in calling without prior arrangement. I am Alexander's sister, and I have been most eager to make your acquaintance." Charlotte accepted her hands automatically, mind racing. "Lady Beatrice, I am honored, though I confess myself confused as to why you would seek my acquaintance. Because my brother speaks of little else but you, and I wished to meet the woman who has accomplished what I had begun to think impossible, capturing his genuine interest." Beatrice gestured to the settee. "Will you sit with me? I promise I do not bite, despite what society may claim about women who marry for love rather than advantage." The comment, delivered with self-deprecating humor, dissolved some of Charlotte's tension. She sat, studying her visitor with cautious curiosity. Lady Beatrice was perhaps 26 herself, with an air of quiet confidence that suggested she cared little for society's opinions. Her mourning clothes were fashionable, but not ostentatious. She had been widowed 2 years prior, Charlotte recalled, and had loved her husband deeply, despite his lack of fortune. "Your brother and I shared a few conversations," Charlotte said carefully. "I do not believe they warrant the interest you suggest. On the contrary, Alexander has been different since meeting you. Lighter, more himself than he has been in years." Beatrice leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Miss Hartley, Charlotte. May I call you Charlotte? I know something of what it means to be judged harshly by society. When I married my Henry, the Ton declared me foolish for choosing a younger son with modest prospects over wealthier suitors. They said I would regret my impulsive heart. Did you? Not for a single moment. The 3 years I had with him were worth all of society's disapproval." Sadness flickered across her features before resolve replaced it. "I tell you this so you understand. I know what it is to love outside society's expectations, and I know the courage it requires. I also know that my brother, despite his rank and consequence, needs someone who values him for more than his title. Lady Beatrice, I am not here to pressure you or to interfere where I am not wanted. I am here because I see my brother becoming someone I do not recognize, someone who has stopped hoping for genuine connection. And then he met you, and suddenly he is hopeful again. That, I think, is worth fighting for." Charlotte's eyes stung with unwelcome tears. "I cannot fight against society's judgment. I have no weapons with which to wage such war." "Then perhaps you need allies." Beatrice smiled. "Will you come to tea tomorrow? At Thornfield House? Nothing formal. Just you, myself, and perhaps my brother if he happens to be at home." The invitation was outrageous. Accepting it would fuel gossip, would expose Charlotte to further scrutiny and potential humiliation. Every practical instinct screamed refusal. But Charlotte found herself thinking of those morning walks, of conversations that had made her feel alive for the first time in years, of Alexander's gray eyes watching her with an attention that felt like the sun breaking through winter clouds. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I will come." Beatrice's smile blazed bright. "Excellent. I shall send the carriage for you at 3. After Lady Beatrice departed, Charlotte sat in the empty drawing room, her heart hammering with equal parts terror and exhilaration. She was being foolish. She was inviting heartbreak. She was stepping directly into the spotlight she had spent years avoiding. But for once, she thought, she would be foolish. She would hope. She would dare to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she might be worth choosing. The following afternoon, arriving at Thornfield House felt like entering a dream. The Pembroke family residence was a monument to generations of wealth and power. Gleaming marble, priceless art, furnishings that spoke of taste and consequence. Charlotte felt acutely aware of her modest dress, her worn gloves, the shabbiness of her circumstances in contrast to such grandeur. But Beatrice greeted her with warmth that transcended social difference, leading her to a private sitting room that felt surprisingly intimate despite its elegance. They had been conversing for perhaps 20 minutes, discussing books, mutual acquaintances, the absurdities of social ritual, when the door opened and Alexander appeared. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes finding Charlotte immediately. The expression that crossed his face, surprise, pleasure, something deeper that made her breath catch, was entirely unguarded. "Charlotte," he said, then seemed to remember propriety. "Miss Hartley, forgive me. I did not know we had a guest." "How remarkable," Beatrice murmured, not bothering to hide her amusement. "Given that I specifically mentioned I was entertaining this afternoon, and you specifically asked who my guest was. But please, do join us. I was just about to check on the tea preparations." She swept from the room before either could protest, leaving them alone in a space that suddenly felt charged with unspoken tension. "Your sister schemes with admirable transparency," Charlotte said, attempting lightness. "She schemes with excellent intentions." Alexander moved, closer, his gaze never leaving her face. "I sent you a note, requesting permission to call on you formally. Did you not receive it?" "No." Charlotte's heart stuttered. No, I received nothing." "Your uncle likely intercepted it. Or perhaps his butler, acting on instructions." Alexander's jaw tightened. They would not wish to encourage what they see as an inappropriate connection. "It is inappropriate." "Why?" The question was fierce, challenging. "Because society has decided you are not worthy of courtship? Because your father's financial mistakes somehow diminish your value as a person? Because you lack a dowry, as though a woman's worth can be measured in pounds sterling?" "Because I am realistic!" Charlotte rose, needing movement, needing distance from the intensity of his presence. "You are a duke, Alexander. You could have anyone. Lady Millicent Ashworth is beautiful, wealthy, connected to half the peerage. Why would you possibly choose—" "You," he interrupted, closing the distance between them. "I would choose you, Charlotte. I am choosing you. Do you understand? These past 3 days have been torture. I have thought of nothing but our conversations, the way you laugh when something genuinely amuses you, the intelligence in your eyes when you debate a point. I have been to a dozen social functions and found them all unbearably hollow because you were not there. You barely know me. I know that you are honest when everyone else performs. I know you possess courage society has tried to crush but failed to break. I know that speaking with you feels like breathing after years of suffocation. Is that not knowing enough?" Charlotte stared at him, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. "Why are you saying these things?" "Because they are true. Because I am tired of pretending I do not feel them. Because tomorrow I intend to walk with you in Hyde Park at the fashionable hour, 5 o'clock, when all of society will witness. And I want you to understand that I am not ashamed of your company. I am proud of it. They will mock you. They will say terrible things about both of us. Let them." His hands cupped her face with exquisite gentleness. "Charlotte, I have spent 3 years avoiding genuine connection because I feared manipulation. But you ask nothing of me. You expect nothing. You simply allow me to be myself, and that is the greatest gift anyone has offered me in longer than I can express." "I am afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of hoping. Afraid of believing this is real." "Then let me prove it to you. Walk with me tomorrow. Let society see us together. Let me demonstrate that my regard is not secret or shameful, but something I claim publicly." Before Charlotte could respond, Beatrice returned with tea service, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes danced with satisfaction. The remainder of the visit passed in a haze of conversation that Charlotte barely registered, her mind caught in endless loops of disbelief and tentative, terrifying hope. When she returned home that evening, her aunt and uncle subjected her to sharp questioning about the visit, their disapproval palpable. But Charlotte barely heard their warnings and criticisms. Her thoughts were consumed by a single question. Did she possess the courage to step into visibility, to risk everything on the possibility that Alexander's regard might be genuine? The following day, she dressed with trembling hands. Her best dress, though modest by society's standards, was freshly pressed. She arranged her hair with extra care. At precisely 4:30, she left her uncle's house and made her way to Hyde Park, her heart thundering so loudly she was certain passers-by could hear it. The park teemed with fashionable society taking their afternoon promenade. Carriages paraded slowly along the paths, their occupants engaged in the elaborate ritual of seeing and being seen. Charlotte felt every eye that passed over her, felt the moment of recognition followed by dismissal or, worse, predatory interest. Why was Charlotte Hartley here during fashionable hours? Had desperation finally driven her to inappropriate pursuit of attention? She nearly turned back, nearly fled before humiliation could be made public and complete. But then she saw him. Alexander approached on foot, having left his carriage at the park entrance. He walked with purpose and unmistakable intent, his eyes fixed on her. Around them, conversations faltered, heads turned. The spectacle of the Duke of Thornfield making his way directly toward Charlotte Hartley was too extraordinary not to command absolute attention. He stopped before her and bowed deeply. "Miss Hartley, will you do me the honor of walking with me?" Charlotte curtsied, her throat tight. "Your Grace." He offered his arm. She placed her hand on it with fingers that trembled, and together they began to walk along the park's central path while all of fashionable London watched. The whispers started immediately, a sound like wind through leaves, sibilant and spreading. Charlotte kept her spine straight, her gaze forward, her hand steady on Alexander's arm, though panic screamed through her veins. This was madness. This would destroy what little reputation she retained. Society would never forgive such presumption. "Breathe," Alexander murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "You are magnificent, and they are merely jealous. They think I have entrapped you. Then they are fools." He adjusted their pace, ensuring they remained in the most visible position possible. "Let them think what they wish. I know the truth, and so do you. That is what matters." They passed Lady Ashworth and her daughter Millicent, whose perfect face had gone rigid with shock. They passed matrons who had snubbed Charlotte for 6 seasons, young debutantes whose mothers had kept them carefully distanced from the rejected girl's contaminating influence. Each step felt like walking across hot coals, exposure complete and merciless. But Alexander's presence beside her was unwavering. He did not hurry their progress or minimize their visibility. Instead, he paused to greet acquaintances, introducing Charlotte each time with such respect that refusal to acknowledge her would have been direct insult to him. Slowly, agonizingly, society bent to the reality of his regard. By the time they completed their circuit of the park, Charlotte's hands had stopped trembling. She had survived visibility. More than that, she had walked beside a duke while society watched, and the world had not ended. "Tomorrow," Alexander said as they reached the park entrance, "I shall call upon you formally. With your permission, of course. My uncle will not allow it. Then I shall speak with your uncle about my intentions. I am accustomed to negotiating difficult conversations, Charlotte. Do not fear. I will not abandon this simply because your relatives prove challenging. He kissed her hand, a courtly gesture performed in full view of society's lingering eyes, before handing her into his carriage for the journey home. Charlotte watched him through the window as they pulled away, his figure strong and certain amid the chaos their walk had created. In her uncle's drawing room an hour later, facing his rage and her aunt's hysteria, Charlotte discovered something new in herself: defiance. They railed against her presumption, her schemes, her betrayal of their kindness. But their words slid past her like water against stone. She had been seen. She had been valued publicly by a man whose regard could not be questioned. Whatever consequences followed, she would face them without regret. The note arrived the following morning, delivered by a footman in Thornfield livery, whose very presence in her uncle's modest entry hall caused consternation. Charlotte unfolded the heavy paper with hands that trembled only slightly. Miss Hartley, I call upon you this afternoon at 3 o'clock. I have already written to your uncle requesting the interview. Whatever objections he raises, know that my determination is absolute. I will not be dissuaded. Yours, Alexander. The signature alone, not Thornfield, but simply his given name, spoke volumes about his intentions. Charlotte pressed the note against her chest, closing her eyes as hope and terror warred within her. This was happening. This was real. Her uncle's study door slammed with force that shook the walls. Raised voices carried through the townhouse, her uncle's indignant bluster, her aunt's shrill panic. Charlotte descended the stairs slowly, preparing for battle. You have overstepped every boundary of propriety. Her uncle's face had gone dangerously red. The Duke of Thornfield seeks an audience. With you? Have you no shame? No understanding of the scandal you invite upon this household? The Duke seeks an audience because he wishes to speak with me. I fail to see the scandal in that. You have been pursuing him, throwing yourself at him with the desperation of a woman who knows her time has passed. And now, when he shows you the smallest courtesy, doubtless from pity or misguided kindness, you presume to encourage his attentions. Charlotte met her uncle's gaze with newfound steadiness. I have pursued no one. The Duke of Thornfield sought my company of his own volition. If you cannot believe that a man of his standing might genuinely value my conversation and character, then perhaps the failing lies in your perception rather than my actions. Her aunt gasped at such defiance, but Charlotte found she could not regret the words. 6 years of swallowing humiliation had built a reserve of anger she had not fully acknowledged until this moment. You will not receive him, her uncle declared. I will not have this household made a laughingstock because you harbor delusions of grandeur. Then I shall receive him elsewhere. Charlotte moved toward the door. Perhaps in the park, where we have met before, or at Lady Beatrice Pembroke's residence, where I am always welcome. You cannot prevent this, uncle. You may disapprove, but you cannot prevent it. She left them sputtering behind her, climbing to her small chamber where she could breathe without their poisonous doubt filling her lungs. Through her window, she could see the street below, could watch the passing carriages and pedestrians going about their ordinary lives, unaware that hers was transforming with dizzying speed. At precisely 3 o'clock, the Duke of Thornfield's carriage drew up before the house. Charlotte watched Alexander descend, his bearing radiating ducal authority. He did not appear nervous or uncertain. He appeared determined, purposeful, as though calling upon impoverished spinsters in defiance of social expectation was simply another task to be accomplished with thoroughness and resolve. The interview that followed occurred in her uncle's drawing room, with the door properly open, and her aunt serving as chaperone, her expression frozen in an rictus of horrified fascination. Alexander requested permission to court Charlotte formally. Her uncle blustered and objected, citing her lack of dowry, her age, the unsuitability of such an alliance. Alexander listened with patience that Charlotte found remarkable, then systematically dismantled each objection with logic that left her uncle with no ground to stand upon. "Miss Hartley's financial circumstances are of no consequence to me," Alexander said, his tone courteous but implacable. "I possess sufficient wealth to support both of us quite comfortably. As for her age, I find it an asset rather than a liability. She has had time to develop depth of character that younger women often lack. And regarding suitability, I am a duke, sir. My choice of companion is not subject to your approval or society's expectations. I am merely extending you the courtesy of requesting permission, not because I require it legally, but because I respect Miss Hartley's desire to maintain proper relations with her family." The speech left her uncle speechless. Charlotte fought the urge to smile at his floundering attempts to regain conversational ground. "The season's final ball is tomorrow evening," Alexander continued, rising. "Lady Pemberton's annual event. I am extending an invitation to Miss Hartley to attend as my guest, under my sister's chaperonage. I trust you will not object." It was not truly a question. Her uncle's mouth opened and closed soundlessly before he managed a strangled, "Of course not, Your Grace." After Alexander departed, Charlotte endured another hour of her aunt's fluttering anxieties and predictions of disaster. But nothing could diminish the warmth spreading through her chest, the impossible hope that perhaps she had been wrong to resign herself to invisibility. Perhaps she had been wrong about many things. The following evening, Lady Beatrice's carriage arrived to collect her. Beatrice herself had sent an appropriate gown, far finer than anything Charlotte owned, beautifully altered to fit her frame. The silk shimmered like moonlight, elegant without being ostentatious. When Charlotte descended to the carriage, Beatrice's approving smile made her feel beautiful for the first time in years. "My brother is quite beside himself," Beatrice confided as they rode toward Lady Pemberton's residence. "He has attended 1,000 balls, but tonight he is nervous as a boy at his first assembly. You have thoroughly undone his composure, Charlotte. I find it delightful." "I am terrified," Charlotte admitted. "This is the same ballroom where I was publicly humiliated countless times. To return there now, under such circumstances, you return there as a woman valued by a duke. That is not the same as returning invisible." Beatrice squeezed her hand. "You are not alone anymore. Remember that." The ballroom was exactly as Charlotte remembered. Glittering chandeliers, hothouse flowers banking the walls, the cream of London society dressed in their finest. But this time, when she entered on Lady Beatrice's arm, the crowd did not dismiss her. This time, every eye turned and fixed upon her with avid curiosity. Whispers erupted like brushfire. Charlotte Hartley, here, with Lady Beatrice Pembroke, wearing a gown that must have cost a small fortune. The speculation was palpable, delicious to those who trafficked in gossip, horrifying to those who had spent years dismissing her existence. And then she saw Alexander. He stood across the ballroom, surrounded by admirers as always, but his attention was not on them. His gaze found her immediately, and the expression that transformed his features, relief, joy, something deeper that made her breath catch, was visible to everyone present. He moved through the crowd with single-minded purpose, ignoring the young women who tried to intercept him, the matrons who called greetings, the men who attempted conversation. He stopped before Charlotte and bowed deeply. "Miss Hartley, you are breathtaking." The compliment, delivered in a voice pitched to carry, sent fresh waves of speculation through the assembled guests. Charlotte curtsied, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Your Grace, will you dance with me?" It was not truly a question, but she appreciated that he asked. Charlotte placed her hand in his, and he led her onto the floor as the musicians struck up a waltz. Around them, the crowd parted and reformed, creating space for them while ensuring maximum visibility of the spectacle unfolding. Alexander's hand settled at her waist with proprietary certainty. His other hand clasped hers with warmth that seeped through her glove. And then they were moving, spinning into the music while hundreds of eyes watched their every movement. "I have imagined this," he murmured, his voice for her alone despite the scrutiny surrounding them. "Dancing with you, holding you like this, making clear to everyone present that you are mine." "I am not yours yet," Charlotte managed, though her voice trembled. "Then allow me to rectify that oversight." They had reached the center of the ballroom floor, the exact spot where Charlotte had stood invisible so many times, where she had watched other couples dance while remaining perpetually unchosen. Alexander slowed their waltz, then stopped entirely. The music continued for a few bars before faltering into silence as the musicians realized something extraordinary was occurring. Alexander released her waist but kept her hand clasped in his. Then, before the entire assembly of London's elite society, he sank to one knee. The ballroom erupted in gasps and exclamations. Charlotte's vision narrowed to Alexander's face, to the gray eyes looking up at her with absolute certainty and something that looked remarkably like love. "Charlotte Hartley," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence. "You are the most honest, intelligent, courageous woman I have ever encountered. You speak truth when others perform. You possess integrity that no amount of wealth or breeding can purchase. You see me, truly see me, not as a title or a prize to be won, but as a man. I am asking you, before all these witnesses, to do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife. Not because I pity you, not because I am performing some act of charity, but because you are my choice. The only choice I wish to make." Tears blurred Charlotte's vision. Around them, the crowd was utterly silent, society itself holding its breath. She could see Lady Millicent Ashworth's stricken face at the ballroom's edge, her mother's furious expression. She could see the shock and disbelief written on features that had dismissed her for 6 long years. But more than that, she could see Alexander. His hand extended, his heart offered, his entire future balanced on her answer. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across his face was incandescent. He rose, pulling her into an embrace that violated every rule of propriety, but which no one seemed capable of objecting to. The ballroom erupted, some in applause led by Lady Beatrice's enthusiastic clapping, others in scandalized whispers, still others in stunned silence as they recalibrated their understanding of social hierarchy. Alexander released her only far enough to slip a ring onto her finger, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, heavy and beautiful, and utterly real. Then he kissed her hand with deliberate ceremony, making clear to everyone present the seriousness of his intention. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. Charlotte found herself surrounded by well-wishers, some genuine, others opportunistic, all suddenly eager to claim acquaintance with the future Duchess of Thornfield. Lady Beatrice remained at her side, expertly managing the social chaos, redirecting those whose congratulations rang hollow, ensuring Charlotte was not overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of her social fortunes. Her uncle and aunt appeared, their expressions caught between triumph at their niece's elevation and chagrin at their previous treatment of her. Charlotte greeted them with cool courtesy, neither forgiving nor condemning, simply acknowledging their presence before returning her attention to those whose regard had proven genuine. But the most satisfying moment came when Lady Ashworth approached with Millicent in tow. The matron's smile was brittle as spun sugar. "Your Grace, Miss Hartley, may I offer my congratulations on your engagement?" "You may," Alexander said, his tone perfectly cordial and utterly dismissive. "Though I confess myself surprised." I do not recall you showing Miss Hartley any courtesy prior to this evening. In fact, I have distinct memories of observations about contaminating influences and stale air. Perhaps your memory is more charitable than mine." Lady Ashworth's face went scarlet. She retreated with whatever dignity remained available to her, dragging her daughter in her wake. Charlotte watched them go with something that was not quite satisfaction, but perhaps justice acknowledged. "That was unkind," she murmured to Alexander. "That was honesty. I am learning the value of it from an excellent teacher." He tucked her hand more securely into the crook of his arm. "Come, let us escape this circus. I wish to speak with you privately." They slipped away to the same library where they had first met, closing the door on the chaos of celebration and speculation. In the familiar dimness, surrounded by books and silence, Alexander pulled Charlotte into his arms properly, cradling her against his chest as though she were something precious and fragile. "Are you well?" he asked quietly. "That was a great deal of spectacle." "I am overwhelmed," Charlotte admitted. "This morning I was the rejected girl. Tonight I am the future Duchess of Thornfield. The transformation is dizzying." "You were never the rejected girl. You were always Charlotte Hartley, remarkable, resilient, extraordinary. Society simply failed to recognize what was before them until I made them look." His hand cupped her face with exquisite gentleness. "You are my choice, Charlotte, not because I wish to rescue you or reform society's cruelties, but because you have given me something I had stopped believing I would find: genuine connection with another human soul." "I am afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of failing you. Afraid of not being enough for the role you are asking me to fill." "Then we shall be afraid together. I am terrified of not being the husband you deserve, of failing to protect you from society's continuing judgment, of somehow disappointing the woman who has trusted me with her future." He rested his forehead against hers. "But I would rather face those fears with you than face certain safety without you." Charlotte kissed him, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as he responded with gentle passion that spoke of respect and desire equally balanced. When they finally drew apart, both were breathless. "When shall we marry?" she asked. "As soon as possible. I have already secured a special license. We could wed tomorrow if you wish, or wait for a more elaborate ceremony if you prefer. I leave the choice to you." Charlotte thought of her uncle's house, of 6 years spent in invisible purgatory, of mornings walking alone through empty parks. She thought of Alexander's steady presence, of Beatrice's friendship, of a future that had seemed impossible mere weeks ago. "Soon," she said. "I wish to marry you soon." "Then soon it shall be." He kissed her again, sealing the promise. 3 weeks later, Charlotte stood in the chapel at Thornfield House, wearing white silk and orange blossoms, her hand clasped in Alexander's as they spoke vows before a small gathering of those who genuinely cared for their happiness. Lady Beatrice served as witness, her eyes bright with joyful tears. Even Charlotte's cousin Charles had traveled from his country practice to attend, offering her a smile of true gladness. When Alexander kissed her as his wife, Charlotte felt the final pieces of her old identity: the rejected girl, the invisible one, the cautionary tale, fall away like a discarded costume. In their place stood something new: Charlotte Pembroke, Duchess of Thornfield. Woman chosen not despite her circumstances, but because of her character. Woman valued, respected, loved. The wedding breakfast was intimate, filled with laughter and genuine warmth. As Charlotte looked around the table at Beatrice's animated conversation, at Alexander's contented smile, at the life spreading before her in all its unexpected beauty, she found herself overwhelmed, not with fear, but with gratitude. Society would continue to whisper, of course, There would always be those who dismissed her elevation as fairy tale or fortune. But Charlotte discovered she no longer cared what society thought. She had been seen by the one person whose opinion mattered. She had been chosen when everyone expected rejection. And that, she thought as Alexander's hand found hers beneath the table and squeezed gently, was more than enough. That evening, standing in the library at Thornfield House, the room that had become their private sanctuary, Alexander pulled her close once more. "Do you remember," he murmured against her hair, "what you said that first night? About how once I knew your name, the conversation would end?" "I remember. You were wrong. Learning your name was not an ending, Charlotte. It was the beginning of everything." She looked up at him, at the face that had become dearer to her than her own, and smiled. "Then let us begin well, Your Grace." "Alexander," he corrected, as he had that morning in the park so long ago. "Alexander," she agreed. And there, in the darkness perfumed with leather and old paper, surrounded by books that had once offered refuge, and now offered witness, the Duke of Thornfield kissed his Duchess and proved that some choices defy expectation precisely because they are right.